So at this time, we want to graciously thank Police Credit Union for sponsoring this lead series. For over 65 years, Police Credit Union has been providing financial solutions to take care of our own, exclusively serving law enforcement professionals and their family members throughout California. They proudly provide banking solutions, including checking accounts, home and auto loans, credit cards, online services, and more. As your financial partner, Police Credit Union is committed to helping you succeed financially, whatever your stage in life. So we thank the Police Credit Union for being our exclusive one-source premier financial partner and for sponsoring our lead series. So my name is Sean Rundle. I'm the Deputy Director here at CPOA out of our office in Sacramento. A couple different hats I wear, one of those being doing our legislative and advocacy work. And just yesterday in some committee hearings and tomorrow, I was discussing some kind of civil unrest response issues. There's various pieces of legislation out there regarding the use of rubber bullets and pepper spray and setting up command posts and media access to those command posts and things like that. So the legislature definitely has their own interest in this issue. But today's topic for this lead series, which we created at the beginning of this pandemic, certainly plays into that. As it's something agencies are dealing with across the board. So the topic today is professional staff response to civil unrest, and we're grateful that Administrator Karen Owens with Long Beach PD's Community Engagement Division has taken time to share with us all today. And this conversation also serves as a great starting point to lead into next week's CPOA Civil Unrest Virtual Debrief on Tuesday the 11th from 9 to noon. You can go to CPOA's training page, cpoa.org, and you'll see that we have a civil unrest debrief with a number of agency folks from throughout the state discussing their response to the issues they dealt with locally. So for that training next week, attendees will have the opportunity to hear from a series of those departments for the dirt cheap price of $20 for members. So it's a great, and you get access to all the different geographical breakout recordings. So if you haven't registered already, we encourage everyone to register on CPOA's page for our civil unrest virtual debrief next week on August 11th. So with that, I will turn it over to Karen Owens to start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in today. A little bit of background about me. I've been with Long Beach Police Department for almost 30 years, all of it in a civilian capacity, everything from the front desk to crime prevention to I was the first civilian public information officer, and now I manage all of the community engagement functions. I've also served as the personnel administrator, so I have a little bit of a variety in background. So Sean asked me to put together some information today about some of the experience that we went through in Long Beach, recognizing that all of you have had some variation on what has been happening across the state with protests, civil unrest. Some cities obviously harder hit than others, and our thoughts go out to them because there's been some really, really challenging times going on in some of our cities, not just in California, but across the country. So a little bit of background on Long Beach. We are a fairly large organization. We have about 850 sworn and a little over 300 in our professional staff. Our dispatchers are not under the police department. Our public safety dispatch team is under a separate city department combined with our fire dispatch, and that's under the Department of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Communication. So our dispatchers are not included in those numbers that I gave you, but they are definitely a strong partner with us, and we work closely with them. So given that we only have about 30 minutes, what I tried to do is put together a real high overview of the different functions within our department where we use civilian support staff. And then some of the challenges we faced, some lessons learned, some of the high profile media things that came our way, and then some of the just how we're dealing with employee wellness during this time period. Civil unrest, protest, COVID, there's the anti-police narrative that's out there right now. There's a lot of stuff going on, probably more so than any time in our industry's history. So with that, I'm going to share screen. I just put together a few slides. Let's see. Hang on just a sec. All right. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right, very good. So with that, a little bit of background on the events that happened in our city. We really had one significant day with violence. We knew that for those of you who aren't familiar with where Long Beach is, we're about 30 miles south of Los Angeles. We were monitoring all of the protests and things that were going on with our neighbor to the north. And so we started gearing up on Saturday, the 30th of May. Had folks coming in. We really we had a little bit of activity, but nothing really significant. And really things started gearing up. We knew we had a major protest coming on Sunday. So that's when we started gearing up and going to tactical alert and getting our folks in. We utilized civilians in our department at our incident command post. Our department operations center was set up in a different facility. For those of you not familiar with Long Beach, we have one main headquarters building, and then we have 5 other police facilities. 3 of them are patrol substations, our police academy, and we have a field support division that's by the airport that has all of our motors, helicopter, all of that. So we had a separate department operations center going on to monitor the police operations within our city. And then the incident command post was at a separate site. Our executive team, we bounced around a little bit with our executive team. Everybody was all at the incident command post at first. And then as time went on, they moved offsite to a different location. We civilians in our media relations, our information technology, finance. Long Beach has its own jail. So we have detention officers and folks who work booking and all of that 24/7. Same with our records. Like everybody else, our record staff, works very hard to try to keep things moving on the paperwork side of it. We have a 24/7 front desk in our main headquarters lobby, and they take everything from walk-ins to phone reports, bail. They handle jail visitation. We have a lot of administrative support personnel throughout the department, everything from crime analysts, clerk typists, assistant admin analysts, just all over, in various support roles. And then, as I mentioned, our dispatchers who work for a separate department, but are brought in to collaborate and be a part of the team. Let's see, we have probably the most significant thing for us is that we actually closed our police headquarters. We got some intelligence that people were looking to target headquarters, and most of you probably watched the news and saw that other cities had police precincts burned. Because our jail is located in our headquarters building, we could not allow our headquarters building to be compromised, and certainly couldn't let it, allowed it to catch on fire. So if you look in the picture that I have up on here, you'll see the K-rail, which is the concrete and the mesh wire fencing. That is the K-rail that we use during the Grand Prix in our city. And so we actually put it entirely around the police department, probably about 15 feet from the curb line. That was to make sure that our jail and our other operations in the headquarters weren't compromised. All of our employees actually were moved off-site. The challenge for us is that we didn't make that decision until closer to the actual day of the protest. So we were on very short notice forced to relocate all of our core operations out of that building. They were able to remove prisoners from the building, and then we used an off-site location for booking. So logistical challenges, again, relocating that jail, and just think about how much you rely on your technology in your building, and a lot of it's hardwired in, and trying to move all of those with a relatively short turnaround time to completely replicate off-site was a huge challenge for us. Some of our positions are designed to work remotely, some are not. And then just moving all the professional staff to the academy, our record staff, our finance staff, all of our civilian managers, with the exception of just a couple, all worked out of our police academy. It was challenging for us to find a location that, with the COVID restrictions and the physical distancing, we had to be able to find a room that was big enough for everybody to work out of while still having space. And I'll show you a picture on the next slide. But Another challenge that we face is when we shut headquarters down, one of our main locker rooms is downstairs in our headquarters building. So officers that were off duty and worked out of our South Division, which is located in headquarters, really didn't have access to go back in and get their uniform or their guns or their work phone or any of their radios, all of that. So we had to work out some times when in between protests when people could go in and get their stuff and then come back out. And again, as I mentioned, the specialized computer systems, just getting payroll done, making sure that payroll could do what they needed to do for payroll entry. We are on a much older system. We're in the process of transitioning to a new one. So not all computers are hooked in with that, and just all the paper time cards and things like that that we still use. It was very challenging for our payroll staff. Command posts were located at different sites. As I mentioned, our DOC, our Department Operations Center, was located at our North Division, and our incident management team headquarters was actually located by our airport. So just trying to facilitate communication between those two entities was just an ongoing challenge. I think everybody's faced with communication challenges no matter what size your agency is, especially when people are off-site, and trying to just make sure that everyone had the most current information and relevant information in order to make decisions. And that was a theme that we saw throughout the course of the week, was making sure that the right people had the right information. After hours communications, and this will relate to our poll question in a minute, we were calling people in, but we did not have updated phone numbers. We had great phone numbers for everyone's work phone, but maybe in your agency it's similar to ours. When people go off duty, they leave their work phone in their locker and they don't necessarily take it home with them. And so it's great to have that work number, but you really need an after hours contact number to be able to reach them in an emergency situation when they're off duty and with their family and not answering their work phone. We did not keep up our emergency call out rosters, and I don't know that we really facilitated having secondary numbers for everyone. And that was a bit of a challenge, because we ended up having 2 of our civilian professional staff calling in everybody who was going to be needed to come back once we went to the 12-hour shifts. And that also, in our debrief, it came up a little bit of a challenge when you have a civilian calling someone who maybe is a sworn person of rank, a sergeant, a lieutenant, or even officers, and they're essentially ordering them back in, but yet technically within the structure, they don't have the authority to order them back in. So we had a lieutenant standing by that if somebody really pushed back, the lieutenant was there to get on the phone if we needed it. So that was just something that we brought up in our debrief about, making sure it's the right person to make the calls. And could we have used technology better to push text messaging out or something of that nature? And it just took a long time. And then the language used, like, hey, can you come in, is different than this is an emergency, you must come in, we're ordering you back into work. So making sure that when you communicate with your staff, you're using the right language that gets you the desired response. And we found that for the most part, everybody responded, but there was some that we needed to make a couple of phone calls for. And then when we go to stage 3 tactical alert, it's 12 hours on, 12 hours off, no days off for sworn personnel. That does not necessarily carry over to all of our civilian staff. And that was a little confusing because no one really thought to clarify that. And I think some of the civilian staff was trying to figure out, did that apply to them or not? So we ended up having the civilian managers communicate with the professional staff, all of those who were reporting into the academy, and then others were able to either not report in if it wasn't their regular workday, or they telecommuted from home if that was appropriate for their position. We already had started some of the telecommuting because of COVID, so it was a really interesting crossover of 2 different emergency situations trying to be managed simultaneously. We had significant health order restrictions like everybody else in the state. Our city has done a really great job of keeping communications going with COVID, pushing that information out on a daily basis. We have a website. Our Joint Information Center for the city has been operating since March. And so we have a pretty good pipeline of communication going, that people are used to seeing information get pushed out. So we had access to that. That communications function was already up and running. So anything that we needed to do from a citywide standpoint, we already had the team in place. So that, while it was double work and double layers of work, it was a great thing for us that we already had the team in place. Everybody had been working together since March. So decision making is a little different from a health thing versus a public safety. So we had some bumps in the road just in terms of process, but overall the information got out. We used our alert system to push messaging out for protests and curfews, things of that nature. So those are kind of the higher level things. I think we put a poll. Sean, you've got a poll question. We wanted to reach out to all of you on the communications issue and find out how different agencies notify their people in an emergency situation. So Sean, can you throw that up?
We'll give everyone about 30, 45 seconds to fill out this poll question, and we'll share the responses with everyone. It'll be up on the screen so everyone can see what your peers are dealing with. So we'll give this about 30 seconds. Please respond to the poll. We're about 70% voted, so a couple more seconds and we'll throw up the results. So there you go. 56% automated, 17 in person, and close to 30% some other means. So I'm sure throughout one point or another, or towards the end, I'm sure, I know if we CPOA, we would love to, and I think Jeremy as well. I'd love to hear what some of those other options.
So I talked to some of my colleagues who helped manage our police academy and the civilian staff. If you can see in the picture that I have posted, we are very fortunate that we have our own police academy. So we had some larger classroom facilities that had computers already in it. This is our computer lab. I know that in our city, we actually have our technology and innovation department has a computer room. So it would be, probably helpful for you guys to identify if you had to go offsite, if you had to leave your facility for whatever reason. It may not be civil unrest. It could be a bomb threat. It could be, something happens where there's a structural or a health issue or something that you need to leave. Where else in your community, whether it's a city facility or a community partner, could you access? Obviously, within the police department, we all have firewalls and special security measures for all of our data and information. So having another police facility was our best option, but we certainly have set it up like for our COVID Joint Information Center, we had that in a big training room out at the fire headquarters. So whatever works best, that's something that for your division or your section that you work in, how could you replicate your operations if you had to completely go remote and go mobile? The communications, like I talked about, I just think in any organization, and not just because I'm a public information officer, but just communications in general, whether you're talking tactically, you're talking internal operations, communicating with your community, with your city leaders, it's just always a critical function that everybody needs to have the best information as quickly as possible so that everyone's on the same page and making decisions and moving in the same direction. As I mentioned, with all the COVID stuff happening, our city is, doing a great job with it, but we have a lot of city resources that were already fully invested in the COVID response, and then looking at how we had to modify those responses and all other city services that they'd already been modified once. So I think flexibility and adaptability is really a key trait that is important in today's world. I mean, we're all doing this by Zoom instead of in a training room. I think some of those adaptabilities will move forward with us. I think we're all loving the fact that we can do things like this remote and have access to the information, and it's becoming more and more accepted. So we were able to use this type of technology to connect with the small groups that we needed to as well. Communicating internally versus externally. When you have limited resources, what comes first? Obviously, you got to get your own people on the same page, but there's also a demand for information publicly. And how do you balance that push-pull? Do you pull in additional people? I was in a position where a portion of my media relations staff was vacant. And so we have some part-time backup PIOs that are from patrol and other parts of the department. So my organization was good enough to allow one of those part-timers to be pulled from patrol and to actually work with us for several months to make sure that we had the stability that we needed in order to get the messaging out that was necessary for both internal and external. So if you have a limited number of resources, who can you pull from? Are there other people internally that can be cross-trained for backup? Do you have other people in the city, like we were able to pull from our city PIO team to help us push out the emergency messaging? What are your organization's priorities? And sometimes you have to be able to get to the bosses in order to get those priorities clarified, because what you may think is the most important in the grand scheme of everything that's going on may not be at the top of your boss's priority list or your city leader's priority list. So making sure that you're communicating and aligning your path with whatever the stated priorities are of the city and of your city leadership. The other thing for us is documentation. We were so scrambling to get everybody and get them all set up. I feel like that maybe compromised some of our documentation. It just took us longer to get things that we could have normally pushed a button on a computer, but when we're doing things by hand and tracking and the record keeping was being done manually as opposed to electronically, it created a lag time for us to get, if someone says, how many arrests did we make? We had to go get somebody to count it as opposed to just pulling up a report. So making sure that you have documentation. Most of us have, if you've been around a while, you know that there's oftentimes opportunity for reimbursement from the federal government, from FEMA, if it's a state of emergency. And so needing to make sure that everyone's time cards are recorded, how many hours did they work, who was there, who wasn't there, making sure that the proper reporting is done, documenting all the money spent. I mean, our finance, it's critical in that, in making sure that purchases that were made, equipment that was needed, anything that we had to get replenished or used during that time period has to be documented and flagged so that we can identify what the total cost was for the response to that event. So making sure that someone is assigned for documentation and being able to have that information available. So when you do your debriefs, when you do your report out for reimbursement, you don't have to spend extra hours on top of hours on top of hours trying to pull it all together. And then when you're on 12-hour staffing and people aren't getting days off, they're not getting the admin time that they would normally get at the end of their shift, that also creates a backlog for information where people are trying to file reports and trying to get information back, but it just hasn't been created yet. So we found that was a bit of a challenge. Those emergency call out rosters, I can guarantee you we have a project assignment already underway for us to update and make sure that we have current information for how to get a hold of people off duty if there's another emergency situation. We managed to get a hold of everybody that we needed to, but I think it could have been faster and we could have done it a little more effectively. And then staffing, knowing that this is probably between COVID and this was probably the longest time in years and years and years that I can think back on where we had a continuous event going on. We rolled, I think I worked 86 hours that week that we had from Sunday the 31st I think, I don't even know how many days it was in a row. It all comes back to in a blur. But we had folks working 10, 12, 15, 16, 17 days in a row. And there's only a limited number of resources to go around. So making sure that you have continuity to backfill those, and that everybody doesn't stay 24/7. You got to make people go home and get some rest and come back up. And somebody's got to work the graveyard shift. Somebody's got to work the day shift, and figuring all of that out, preferably ahead of time. And then adapting as you need to if somebody's out sick or somebody's out of town, modifying those plans, just like you would in any other emergency response. The collateral assignments for us, that's just something that came up where you have helpers and they're there in a collateral role to support you, but when their primary role pulls them in full time and you don't have access to them, that is another thing to look at who you are using in a collateral assignment and whether or not they'll actually be available for you if something really significant happens. So just something to take into consideration. I threw up here equipment to work remotely, computers, phones, templates for reports or forms and things that you use on a regular basis, chargers for mobile devices, remote access. Even today, I'm out of town. I'm doing this from Nevada, and my remote access going through the hotel's system, I ended up having to call IT because the firewalls and stuff that are on my laptop, because it's a department laptop, wasn't necessarily compatible with the hotel's Wi-Fi. So making sure that you know that you can use your equipment remotely, regardless of if you're in a non-police facility, and having access to enough laptops and enough computers. If it's just documentation of things, you can use that anywhere. But if you actually are trying to access network systems, that was a little more challenging. So we, like for us in the media relations side of it, trying to get in access our content management system for our website to make sure that we could upload news releases, getting access to reports and information and call histories and things of that nature. We just all have to remote in through like a VPN system. So making sure that we had enough equipment, laptops, and then you see, thank goodness we had our academy computer lab. We were able to, kind of space people out and use that. So our records and our finance and all of those folks were able to access the city's online financial systems and payroll systems to help get stuff handled. But we normally, had that facility not been available to us, we would have been very challenged in trying to get what we need, or had to split everybody up in even more remote locations. So, and then, Sean, do you want to start with questions yet, or you want me to go ahead and go through like the media part of it?
I think it's a good time to pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments, maybe from something you dealt with at your agency. Feel free to speak up or put in the chat, which we'll monitor. But we'll take a quick pause to see if there are any questions before she continues. Any questions?
And I can't see the chat with the screen sharing going on, so if there's questions, if you could help.
Sure. Anyone have any questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself and that's now from what's been covered thus far. All right, I don't hear any yet.
Okay, very good. Just switching gears. I threw up a couple of things that added some extra layers of stress on us, not just the media relations unit, but us as an organization, all the way through. I threw up a couple of headlines. We had we had four. I could only fit three on the screen, but so the image on the left, you'll see we actually had a police officer that we fired during this week. I'm really referencing the entire first week from May 31st for the next several days. We had a recruit, not a recruit, sorry, an officer who was still on training. And he took a picture of, as you can see, blood splatter. And that was posted on social media. And then some other people commented on his posts. His baton was in the picture. It was not this individual, it was not something that he actually was involved in, but it was a story that went national. We ended up firing the officer because he was probationary. We were able to release him from employment within 24 hours of this happening. So we had a huge response and a huge media interest in that story. And all of this stuff that I have put up here is all open source data, so I'm not sharing anything secret that we haven't already talked about. Optics was a big concern for us. The middle photo you'll see is a traffic stop. The traffic stop itself, we had a man with a gun call. We were able to find the vehicle that was involved in it. They had pointed at what appeared to be a weapon at some National Guard folks that were in our city. The challenge is that we were all rolling 4 to a car. So all of our officers were, 4 and 5 deep in a vehicle. So when we had a traffic stop, if 3 vehicles showed up, we might have had 15 officers, or 4 vehicles, we had 16 to 20 officers. And so it looked like we were intentionally swarming on traffic stops and things like that, when in actuality, it was just because the same number of units showed up that would normally do it, but because you have 3 and 4 deep, it looked terrible. So we had to address that and address, the community outrage on that. And then on the right, some of you may have seen, we had a picture that went viral. The angle of this makes it look as if the officers on the skirmish line were pointing a 40 millimeter at the child on the man's shoulders. In actuality, they're not. We were able to look at body cam video and other stuff, and they are not, but the optics of it and the outcry and all of that was very stressful for not only the officer involved, but everyone in general. Our union put a statement out, we put a statement out, the person who took the photo, journalists that were out there. But it just seems like in today's world, the facts and the truth aren't always really relevant. Sometimes people just want to say what they want to say. And so we are always fighting that negative perception that is just challenging. It's challenging for everybody. It's disheartening and very frustrating when there are facts that do counter, but people aren't necessarily interested in that. So, we do our best. We do our best to communicate and be factual and try not to be defensive. We had one other situation where we had a reporter that was hit by a ricochet from a 40 millimeter round in the throat. He posted his injuries on social media. That turned into a whole long, several week ongoing, communication while we investigated that, and the reporter was able to provide some information but didn't want to be interviewed. So their station covered the story. So we've been dealing with that again, national level story. And all of these by themselves are challenging, but when you add the collective number of them and all of them occurring in layers and one after the other, it added a lot of stress to the organization and to the people in the organization during an already stressful time. And then we also had Officer Anton Fisher, wonderful guy, great officer. He was killed in a motorcycle accident that same week on his way to work. He was part of that tactical response that was going out. He was coming back in for the afternoon evening shift, and his significant other also works for the department and was following him and witnessed the accident. So it was already a traumatic situation and then compounded. So we had double the trauma, another layer of trauma for the organization on top of all of the other things that were going on. The challenges like everyone else is facing when we're dealing with funeral restrictions under COVID. Lots of people wanting to go to the service, limited capacity at the facility, trying to find a facility that had a big enough capacity to allow, up to 100 people. We were fortunate to find a local church that was able to work with us and also had the capability of live streaming the service. So we were able to live stream that. So if you weren't one of the family and friends and close friends to go to the actual service, then we were able to, have that live stream so you could watch it from anywhere or any facility on your phone. And then again, another layer of trauma. It was a really, really, really difficult week. And so I wanted to kind of end just my overview with highlighting something that we've been doing in our organization that I'm really proud of. Our chief and our executive team and command staff worked with our city to get a contract with Counseling Team International. This is separate from the city's employee wellness. It's separate from our Police Officers Association psychologist. It is something that our employees can go to at any time. They can reach out. It is completely anonymous. No, it does not go through your insurance. It does not go through the department. There's no record of who went. The only thing that we as an organization get back is how many people have used it. 6 people called us this week, 12 people called us last week. And it's open for employees and their family members. So it could be anything from, marital counseling, stress, PTSD, just they came out when we've had officer suicide in the past. In this case, when we had the officer who was killed in the car accident, Counseling Team International will send folks on site for us and help us to debrief and support our employees and the wellness. And if anybody was just having a tough time and didn't want to share that internally or with their peers or their supervisors, they could reach out to CTI outside of work and have those private conversations and get the support that they need. And it's proven extremely beneficial for our organization. We have a lot of officers, I think the ones that I know of that have used it, and there's a couple that have really championed it and came forward and shared their stories. But it has really been a fantastic resource where people know they can make that phone call and it's truly private and no one will know about it unless they choose to share it. And with their families being able to go, I think it really does help for employee wellness. And we had already had that in place prior to COVID, prior to all of this happening. So our employees were already aware of it and we had utilized it successfully. So obviously we have our other support systems in place as well. Our city has its own health department. We have an employee wellness program. Our POA has a psychologist on staff, if you were on retainer for that. And then there's always just the peer support. We are all like a family. Everybody goes through those tough times together as well as the good times. And so everybody really made an effort that if they saw somebody who was really struggling, to reach out and try to make sure that they had the support that they needed internally to make it, so everybody could make it through these challenging times, as best as they can. So that's kind of my overview. I tried to keep it within close to a half an hour. But if anyone has questions or thoughts or comments, love to hear it.
So yeah, no worries, because we had a few minutes of announcements at the beginning. There's a question in the chat box. Was there any issues when you released the information regarding the firing of your probationary officer, especially as it relates to POVAR? But any pushback once that information was released?
No, we actually had a tremendous amount of support internally. We weren't sure how the officers were going to respond. And because this was a probationary employee and not a permanent employee, we are allowed to do the probationary dismissal. So, and we obviously don't share personnel information and things like that. We did not go into specifics. Our news releases, we did a news release on it. We posted it and just indicated that, that officer was dismissed. And we really didn't get a lot of follow-up questions. We did get some positive response, if you can say that, it's a terrible situation all the way around. But the fact that we made swift action, we took swift action, and we gave a response within 24 hours. Had it been a permanent full-time employee, we probably would have had a different process. But because of the probationary status, you don't have the property rights that you do as a permanent employee.
And then there's a question I have regarding the media. Kind of the last slide you had with the 3 photos, but there's another one. It's been said that looters who left Santa Monica then moved to attack Long Beach on May 31st. Any truth to that you know of?
We do believe that there were organized groups. Our chief has been pretty vocal about that. We have a looting task force that's still in the process of investigating specific instances and specific reports. I know they've made several arrests and we've posted those on our news release, but There was our belief that there is definitely organized groups, more organized than they ever had been. For anybody that's been around for a while, that were here in like 92 when we had the 92 riots, the folks this time around really appeared much more sophisticated and had planned communication that we could tell that they were very intentional in what they were doing, as opposed to just crimes of opportunity. But we do believe that there were some crossover, but I don't have enough specifics to be able to deep dive into that with you.
And then there's one, what tasks or things did you have any professional staff that are assigned to patrols, such as community services officers, do during that time?
All of our community meetings and everything else and all of our outreach efforts had already been curtailed because of COVID. So folks had been, our internal staff that did our community service type, we have community outreach civilian staff that work alongside with our patrol resource officers to do that outreach. They were either reassigned to assist with, like, for example, our Department Operations Center or other support roles for the divisions that they worked in. You know, we did have some community outreach with our ministers group, some high level, command level interactions with the chief and some of those leaders. On the Saturday, we had some on the Saturday prior to, and then as the week went on, and kind of the things settled a bit, we had some follow-up meetings with some business associations, all by Zoom, all there. So our outreach has been more limited, but they do respond to questions and handle each of our geographical patrol divisions. We're very creative. We have north, south, east, and west, but each one of them has their own leadership group, from community leaders and residents and folks within their geographical division. So they have a good relationship already established. So our outreach folks were available if someone had a question or a concern or a problem. They know that they can reach out either via email or phone to their divisional representatives. So I know there was communication going on back and forth, but during the week of the protests and everything that's been going on, large scale like outreach events were all very limited, and really not happening until things are now kind of settling down. We've had a total of about 90 protests since May 31st. All of them, and they could be 10 people, they could be 200 people, car caravans, fixed rallies, marches. We obviously very quickly adjusted. We had some challenges the first day, but within about 5 or 6 hours, we had adapted and adjusted how we were responding to things. And since that point, we have had no significant violence that has occurred. So we're really pleased that we've been able to support people's First Amendment rights to express their opinion and be heard, as long as they do it in a lawful and nonviolent manner.
Very good. And then Latha and some of the attendees are our minds think alike, because they kind of asked the question I was considering. Were you able to get information out to the community quickly through social media, et cetera? And then part two, any recommendations for some small agencies that may not have a PIO?
Okay, so first question on were we able to get information out? We pushed out curfew information and significant protest information. We pushed it out through social media, on not only the department social media, but on our city social as well. We coordinated and collaborated so that messaging would be pushed out. Curfew information and things that came from the city manager's office were pushed out over city social. So that was something that I think was very helpful. Large scale protests will push information out on social media. We try to find the balance between not advertising our protest and encouraging somebody to come, like attracting people to it, versus acknowledging that, hey, there's going to be a significant disruption in this portion of the city. So we came up with some language that we got approved in advance that was like, we are aware of a protest activity that is occurring in the area of, and we would give the major cross section. We support everyone's right to express their First Amendment rights. However, violence will not be tolerated. So we kind of have a standard phrasing that we would put out. And then we did that early on for almost every protest. And now that we've had so many, we've kind of backed it off. And if there's 200 people or more or something really significant, we'll push it out. But if it's 10 people in a fixed location and they're not disrupting traffic, then we've backed off of it because it was just becoming noise. We felt like, people just stopped listening and paying attention when you just repeat the same thing over and over again. As far as PIO, I am a huge proponent of team PIO. We have 4 full-time positions, plus myself, that are civilian PIOs. We have cross-trained a handful of patrol officers, detectives, sergeants to be backup for us for either office coverage or assisting us in the field to cover that. We have a 24/7 on call. We have cross-trained all of our watch commanders to handle media response in the field and after hours responses. So we really do utilize the team approach. And then our professional staff that are the full-time PIOs handle the more politically sensitive things as opposed to the basic routine inquiries. I strongly encourage you to identify those people within your organization who, number one, have an interest and an understanding of the big picture, because you have to understand the politics and the importance of what you say and how you say it, and have some kind of agreed upon guidelines of what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. We in Long Beach have actually created a little blue, it's called the blue card. It has a who, what, where, why, when statement, a basic media statement that you would give on blank date at blank time. We responded to blank type of call. When we arrived, we discovered blank. The investigation is ongoing. So our folks know that if they use that card and they speak off of that and don't go off script, they're not going to get in trouble. They're going to be okay. And then on the back, we have guidelines for field supervisors for how to deal with the media. So there's a lot of layers to the media relations. If you can train your field personnel to have a basic respect and understanding for the process in the field at incident scenes, that will help. And then identifying whether it's a supervisor, a civilian, a detective, somebody who has the ability to respond on higher level things, and collaborate with your city team and your city communications folks. We have found that has served us well, because it's inevitable. You can have the best team or the best plan in place, and then somebody's out of town. I had one of my PIOs was, injured and off duty for a medical leave. Another one had just quit, and you have the best plan, but you still have to come up with who can help you. So identifying who else within your organization. For us, detectives work well because they're usually not working nights and weekends. So if there's something after hours, we have more flexibility with them that doesn't disrupt their regular job. I've got a patrol officer who works graveyard, and that's great because he's cross-trained as a PIO. If something happens in the middle of the night and it's not major, he can assist the watch commander with it and avoid somebody having to be called in, especially if it's just a routine inquiry. So big proponent of the team approach. You have to get your bosses to buy into it and make sure that they are willing to provide the appropriate training and connectivity for the team to be able to work together effectively. I'm happy to talk with anybody offline if that's something that you really want to deep dive into your specific organization. Like I said, I've been doing media relations almost 30 years. So happy to share my 2 cents for whatever that's worth. Ultimately, you have to get buy-in from the top, from your chiefs and your organization for it to work the most effectively.
Very good. While we're closing out, I want to remind everyone of our Civil Unrest virtual debrief via Zoom next week. You'll see there it's August 11th, 9 to noon. You can see a number of different panelists from throughout the state. So just go to cpoa.org and click on training, and you'll see the ability to register for that. Again, at a pretty reasonable price, $20 for members, $40 for non-members. So Karen mentioned being, taking this from Nevada. We definitely greatly appreciate you doing this on your time off, and I think it was very good information that I know a lot of people will share. And if anyone has any follow-up, feel free to get a hold of CPOA, and we'll get you in touch with Karen for any follow-up. But thank you, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. And stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone. If anybody wants to email me direct, it's karen.owens, O-W-E-N-S, @longbeach.gov. I'm back in the office on Monday, and like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions, or if anybody has something specific on the media side, happy to try to help.
Very good. Thank you all.